Audio check.
Teams audio check.
Okay, good morning everyone. It's 9:30, so we shall resume. Got a fairly busy day today. Obviously it's all the back to sort of week one again with the local residents. We've got the PCAA first this morning. With a couple of exceptions, it's not expected that anyone will take longer than 10 minutes other than by prior arrangement, and we've got those that may be speaking longer listed here. We've got a mixture of virtual and physical participants, so we'll be switching between the teams and obviously people sat in the room. Obviously not everyone's here yet, but I'll just say it just for the live stream and for those that are with us. So when we hear from you, obviously you get your 10 minutes, but please can you submit your written transcript to the programme officer so that we've got a written record if you haven't already. I'll try and remind everyone to do that as we go along, but helpful just to say it now. Okay, so Mr Morehouse, if we kick off.
Thank you. Good morning. Our first witness is Mr Justin Millward, please. Good morning again, Mr Millward. Just for the record, you are Mr Justin Millward?
Correct.
And you're a parish councillor in the village of Butcombe?
Yes.
And you've lived there for about 25 years?
That's right.
And just, I'm sure the inspectors will be broadly familiar with the area, but in orientation to the airport, where are you, just to remind us?
Butcombe is a small village. It's a few miles to the southeast of the airport on the eastern side of the A38, the opposite side of the A38 from the airport.
Can you just keep your voice up just a little bit louder, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So just the east side of the airport?
Yes, it's on the east side of the A38 to the southeast of the airport itself.
Thank you. And you've indicated you've lived in the area for approaching 3 decades now.
That's right. Yeah.
Just in general terms, do you want to comment on the changes in the area over that period of time?
The changes in the area really relate to the intensification of traffic in relation to airport expansion, and also there's an element of infrastructure growing on the airport, which is beginning to intrude into the visual rural environment around Butcombe.
Okay. And dealing with the increases in traffic, do you want to comment on the roads in the area, please?
The increase in the traffic, it's twofold. It partly relates to traffic on the A38 itself. Two examples of changes there that I've noticed is that now, or at least pre-COVID, even trying to access the A38 early in the morning is difficult because of the sheer volume of traffic. And at the other extreme, we do seem to get regular gridlocks along the A38, particularly from the Bristol direction, because of the sheer volume of traffic trying to get down it, and the road is unable to cope. The other element to this is that the congestion on the A38 means that increasingly traffic is forced off onto the side roads, the rural lanes, which are not really appropriate for taking large volumes of traffic, and effectively at times become rat runs now for people trying to avoid the congestion on the main road.
And those rat runs, from the point of view of people living in the area, what effect does it have on them? Can you describe what actually goes on with these cars?
It's the frequency and to a certain extent the speed with which they go through Butcombe, to the extent that one of our residents is lobbying for a 20-mile-an-hour speed restriction through the village because of the speed with which we seem to get more and more cars coming through. So it's a gradual incremental increase over time.
I think in your proof you also comment on unauthorised car parking in the area.
That's right. It's another issue. One of the sites we've had in Buckham where it's been a problem in the past is the old Bungalow Inn site, and the issue with the illegal parking is that it's extremely disturbing, if you like, for residents in terms of light pollution, noise, particularly at night of people collecting their cars, and speeding vehicles going up and down the roads to and from the illegal car parking sites. You only have to go down the A38 and look either side to see what the visual effect of a large field full of cars is, which again is degrading to the visual attraction of the landscape.
Do you have any confidence that granting planning permission for additional parking at the airport is going to resolve these problems?
I think it depends partly on the use or taking up of the multi-storey car parks. We still don't have multi-storey car park 2 constructed. I see that multi-storey car park 3 is included in the application. That might help. I think the other element of dealing with it is to radically increase the amount of public transport access to and from the airport. So I don't know if I have confidence in that problem being solved, but I hope that those two aspects will contribute to it.
Thank you. I think in your proof you also comment on what you describe as creeping industrialisation, both within the airport and the perimeter. Do you want to comment on that aspect? I think your proof has a photograph showing the view of the airport.
Yes, the photograph is taken from Row of Ashes Lane, looking northwards towards the airport, and primarily shows the new, I think it's a radar tower or radar installation, which has appeared fairly recently. Just beside that, there's a large administration block which has appeared fairly recently. Both of those were constructed, I understand, under permitted development. They're extremely visible from the surrounding countryside, and I think they're an indication of what has happened and what is likely to continue to happen if expansion of the airport continues, which is, in my opinion, inappropriate development, creeping industrialisation, which will spoil the visual attraction of what is essentially a rural environment around the outside of the airport.
Thank you. And do you want to comment on the general question of the siting of Bristol Airport, Lulsgate, and its suitability for an increasingly large airport?
We are where we are in terms of the airport has developed and exists. I think if you were looking to locate an airport now, Lulsgate would be the last place that you would choose, but we are where we are. I think my concern is that over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen incremental but continuing expansion of the airport itself and its capacity, but the transport infrastructure has not kept up. We have if you like, a rural or a semi-rural transport infrastructure, and we have an international airport, and the two don't go together. The transport network has not kept up with the demands of the airport.
And so far as the transport network is concerned, have you looked at the suggested improvements to the A38?
I have, and I've also looked at North Somerset Council's proposals in their transport consultation for the A38 as well. It seems to me that the proposals made are not what you might call a comprehensive traffic solution to the problem of congestion in the A38. It just seems to be tinkering around the edges with improving traffic lights and a very short stretch of 4-lane traffic capacity, and I'm not convinced that that will solve what's a much wider issue of congestion in both directions, from Bristol to the north and from the M5 to the south.
Thank you, Mr. Millward. I've no further questions for you, unless there's anything you want to add that I've left out.
I think that covers all my points. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Millward. Thank you.
Thank you. I may now call the next witness, Mr. Philip Horton, please. And I think, Mr. Houghton, your statement is reasonably short. It may be quicker if you were simply to read it out, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. Good morning. Just before I read it, just to say that I woke at 6 o'clock this morning. I wake at 6 o'clock every morning when the airport is running, and that is because every morning at 6 o'clock there is one of the early flights that goes off there or thereabouts. And it's a sort of, you kind of get used to it and you accept it, but nevertheless it wakes you every morning. And so I don't need an alarm clock, which one might say is an interesting point around insidious sort of intrusion into one's life in the countryside. So yeah, I'm a resident of a village called Redgell, which is very close to the village of Winford, and they're both to the sort of, I suppose it's sort of about 2 miles southeast of the airport. And one of the other things about the village of Winford, which is where we have a local shop and school and things like that, is that it's now gathering so much traffic that we get traffic jams, literally traffic jams in the middle of the village of Winford. These are caused in part by activity from the airport. So we have these vehicles that I don't know what you call them, but they go alongside aircraft to feed them with catering and facilities and things, and they need to replenish them, and they have local places. So it's a sort of an industrialization of our local village. And it's extraordinary the amount of traffic that goes through there, not to mention some of the sort of local parking that's used for airports. So, as well as being a local resident, I also employ 120 people in Bristol. And so I speak in part as a sort of a business person who's spent his life, and I mean pretty much my entire life, well, certainly from the age of about 14, 15, working passionately to make the world a better place. From my point of view, it's around food and farming, but they all go hand in hand, and increasingly we're aware of the climate issues. So I'll just start on the noise. So I talked to you about being woken. It really does impact in subtle ways on life in our valley, and of course it's not just us, but it's other beings such as birds and general wildlife that the noise gets drowned out. They're calling to one another. We may not see this as being fundamentally important, but my goodness, it really is for the well-being of everything on this planet. I'm really aware of light pollution. It's so significant. It's a sort of insidious creeping of more and more lights in and around the airport, meaning we have already lost so much of our right to the night sky in the Chew Valley. Local village parishes have chosen not to have street lights in the past to protect the rural night sky and peaceful nature of the countryside. These days they hardly need lights to see by, so bright is the penetration from the airport. And obviously further expansion would just exacerbate this. So moving on to the volumes of petroleum, this extraordinary stuff that's been in the ground for millions of years that we extract with unbelievable energetic properties, energy properties. And it's interesting to note that to get a plane off the ground, this is just from doing a bit of Google research searching, it takes around £3,700 in the first 6 minutes of every flight. Let's call that local CO2 impact. It then climbs to its cruise altitude within 30 minutes using a further £9,000 of fuel. An extraordinary feat of engineering and fuel energy, of course. However, the impact of this fuel spend is also extraordinary. And we now know that aviation is a major contributor to climate change. We all know that, of course. But with approximately, as far as I could understand it, 150 flights a day, allowing for many smaller planes to take it over, this takes us to well over 400,000 pounds of local emitted carbon, which is a colossal 1.2 million pounds of CO2 per year. This is just from one airport, and this is before expansion, and also before this is just in the first 3 minutes of takeoff. So if we're serious in any way about climate change, then to allow this figure to grow, in my view, is nothing but insane. In fact, one might argue that it's time that the airport were required to submit plans about how it is going to at least halve this over the next 10 years, not increase it, in line with all the Paris agreements and what we hope will come out of COP26. Since I moved from Bristol in 1996 to Winford, or to Winford area, I have seen at least a doubling of traffic volumes and maybe as many as 3 times. And obviously this is not only horrendous in terms of a living experience and stress on the local villages, but it also increases the CO2 and particulate pollution, increases traffic jams and the stress that comes with them. I also noticed, and this is something that I find really interesting, is that when you drive around or you walk around or you cycle around, particularly I noticed when I cycle around Bristol Airport, the foul amount of rubbish that is in all our verges that just sits there month in, month out and gets crunched up when the verges are mown. It's a real lack of care that one sees. Just moving on to jobs. Jobs. It's been an argument for job creation. Every kind of big development, but it's going to bring jobs to the area. Well, of course, to a degree it does. But is this good enough reason to negate the negative impacts? It's already known that time and time again that such job creations rarely live up to their stated aspirations. If you just look back through when the airport said they were expanding however many, and there was planning permission, I can't remember how long ago, 8-10 years ago, something in that region, and all the stated increases in job creation, and none of them came to anything like the figures that were given. So times are really changing, we know that, and boardrooms, whether it's BP, Danone, Bank of England, they will know what's going on, and they know that what was acceptable development plans, what were acceptable development plans in the past, are no longer fit for purpose. They do not take care of our future children's well-being. The uncomfortable reality is pushing home harder and harder that the old days are dead and need to be buried. In other words, there is less and less excuse for continuing to pursue plans that ride roughshod over democracy, over people and planet. This airport expansion, as we all know pretty much unanimously, is total madness, and it's flying in the face of democracy, it's flying in the face of recommendations, it's flying in the face of so many facts of what's needed to tackle climate change as just the main thrust of what we need to do so urgently. We have moved into a new era where how we make decisions has to change. And actually, in a way, it's really simple. Question 1, do we have a climate crisis? Answer, yes. No one disputes this anymore other than a few crazy folk. And this is why most councils have declared this to be true. Question 2, what does crisis mean? Answer, it means an emergency. When COVID arrived, we took drastic action to tackle it at great cost. When we were faced with an invasion back in 1939, it was a crisis, and we moved heaven and earth to defend our nation. We have declared a climate crisis. It's time to move heaven and earth to protect future generations from certain catastrophic and possible extinction. I say to Bristol Airport owners, the game is up. It's time to come together with all the resources we can muster to take on the urgent challenges, and this includes not expanding the airport. I am aware that they are interested in making money for a pension pot. There are other ways. Fill all the space that you've allocated for parking, that they've allocated for parking, with solar panels and windmills. May this not be just a much more sensible use of these spaces and actually help with the climate crisis, not fly in the face of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horton.
Thank you. I'm aware that there's a video link. I don't know whether you want to
Yes, if
turn to
that's okay with you,
Of
Mr. Morehouse. Okay, so on Teams, we've got a Mr. Joss Croft, if you can turn your camera on. Welcome, so I can see you. Can you see us?
I can indeed. Thank you very much
Okay.
indeed. And I prepared a statement that I will read. It's a very short statement. You don't need to worry about that. And so first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Joss Croft. I'm the Chief Executive of UK Inbound. We're a 40-year-old trade association. We've got over 300 members in the UK, ranging from tour operators, attractions, accommodation providers, destinations, and we represent the voice of inbound tourism. Inbound tourism to the UK, for those that don't know, is worth more in exports to the UK than pharmaceutical exports, and it's just shy of car exporting, and is worth about £28.4 billion to the UK economy in 2019. Number of points I'll be addressing today regarding the positive impact that expanding Bristol Airport would have on the jobs, businesses and investment in the region. So to start with, out of that £28.4 billion that comes into the UK, inbound tourism drives revenue for the southwest of £1.3 billion in 2019. And in fact, 25% of all of the international visitors that come to the southwest and 14% of the inbound visitors to Wales arrive through Bristol Airport, which demonstrates its importance in driving that regional spread of international visitors across the whole of the UK. Just looking at perhaps a competitor, Manchester accounts for a much higher proportion of visits to the northwest, 53% and 42% for the whole of the north, thereby demonstrating how a major airport can really drive that spread of economic benefit to rural economies. We know that 1 in 3 of international arrivals only visit London as they don't know what else there is to do in the UK. And additionally, 19% of international arrivals only visit London as they believe that other places are too far from the capital city. An expanded international airport in Bristol with direct access to the region would help address both of those issues. Also, I know that there's been a big focus this year on domestic tourism, but domestic tourism doesn't have quite the same economic advantages in the longer term. And that's because a domestic visitor will typically spend a third of what an international visitor will spend. International visitors spend £700 per visit. Domestic visitors only spend £240 per visit. And of course, they're spent on different things, filling the hotels, filling the restaurants, shopping in the retail outlets as well. And I think the evidence suggests that more money will stay in the region if there is an international airport. And of course, increasing the capacity of the airport means more international visitors will arrive by air and their money will stay in the southwest. So it's been proven that there are very strong links between people visiting a destination and considering it for education, for their children, but also for inward investment. And they're also more likely to buy British goods if they visited the UK as well. And business travel, and I've not really talked about business travel, I've been focusing around leisure and holiday travel, but 30% of the arrivals in England's regional gateways are business visitors, and only 22% of those in London. So the plans for expanding Bristol Airport will bring large economic benefits to the Southwest, the whole of the Southwest, with regards to jobs and investment. And it will also bring greater prosperity for the whole of the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Mr. Clark wants to put some questions to you.
Thank you. Mr. Croft, do you mind answering one or two brief questions?
I'd be delighted to if I can.
Thanks. It sounds like you've got very wide experience of the tourist industry, and you'll be aware of all of the issues around it, I'm sure. In this inquiry, we heard from a number of experts about inbound tourism versus outbound tourism. This is for the inspectors. At paragraph 8.2.2 of Dr. Chapman of Neve proof, he showed that inbound tourism is only just over 10% of flights into Bristol Airport, and more than 2/3 of flights leaving Bristol Airport are carrying tourists who are going elsewhere. Were you aware of that tourism deficit issue?
With regards to Bristol specifically, no. As regards to the wider outbound balance of payment deficits, yes. Outbound tourism, of course, is taking money out of the country to be spent overseas. Inbound is bringing visitors and that export, the foreign exchange into the United Kingdom. But you cannot have a successful inbound tourism industry without having that successful outbound tourism industry. The planes need to be full both ways. And obviously, you know, there are destinations served by Bristol which are primarily for outbound visitors, for example, the Balearics or the Canary Islands. But of course, it's the other flights in that are bringing in those business visitors that want to trade with businesses in Bristol and across the Southwest, and the leisure visitors from all of the major key markets that want to spend their hard-earned money in the Southwest and in Bristol itself. So I think one balances out the other.
But do you accept in broad terms the figure that was given was 11% of traffic is inbound tourism? Do you recognise that figure?
I wouldn't be able to comment one way or the other. I don't know the specifics of that, sir.
But in the light of that figure, do you still consider that the expansion of Bristol Airport would bring economic advantages, as you call them, to the tourist industry?
Yes, I think if you look at the moment, 25% of all of the inbound visitors to the Southwest use Bristol. If we can increase the capacity, that will increase the numbers, and that will increase on the £1.3 billion that is spent by overseas tourists in the Southwest.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Croft. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Okay, if we go back then to the PCAA, Mr. Morehouse, if you can introduce your next witness.
The next witness is Rachel Middleton.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Rachel Middleton. I'm a resident of Bristol, a city that I chose to live in because of its environmental credentials. I'm also a secondary school teacher.
Can you just, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Can you just speak closer to the mic? We're sort of struggling back, all the way back here, so thank you.
Okay, I'm also a secondary school teacher, and every day I know that the young people that I teach are really preoccupied by the climate crisis. So I'm here today to state my opposition to Bristol Airport's appeal to expand. Bristol City Council declared a climate emergency in 2019 and claims to be aiming for carbon neutrality by 2030. The expansion of Bristol Airport sits in direct opposition to these aims and weighs heavy on my mind, preoccupied with the environmental, economic and social changes which must happen immediately and form part of a green recovery from COVID-19. So my main reasons for opposing the expansion are the following. Firstly, the proposed increase in passenger numbers would exacerbate climate change and would not help the transition needed to a low-carbon future. If further airport expansion goes ahead, in 2026, emissions will rise to approximately 1,183 kilotons, an increase of 437 kilotons or 59% in less than 10 years. This figure could be higher if a newer, less polluting fleet of aircraft does not materialise. Carbon offsetting is clearly not the answer, given that a tree takes 40 years to absorb 1 tonne of CO2. To offset these additional emissions would require 180 million trees to be planted every year. Secondly, there would be an adverse impact on wildlife habitats in the area. And given the proximity of the airport to the Mendip Hills, area of outstanding national beauty, I find this aspect particularly troubling. Thirdly, the additional noise, traffic and off-airport car parking would result in adverse environmental impacts for the local community. Extending the Silver Zone car park and allowing the seasonal car park to be used year-round is inappropriate development in the green belt. Number of deaths linked to air pollution, we're becoming increasingly aware of this as a problem. In 2018, there was a staggering 8.7 million people died of links to air pollution. Our failure to address this in the UK will lead to an increase in pollution-related ill health and premature death, and it's not possible to mitigate the adverse effects of this pollution. The economic and social recovery that we need post-pandemic is a real opportunity to make changes which will benefit local economies and environments. I believe that short-haul air travel has really had its day, and Bristol and North Somerset should not facilitate the continuation of this environmental catastrophe that's Bristol Airport expansion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming today. Thank you. Okay. That's all the PCAA witnesses.
It is, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Morehouse. Okay, next then we have Mr. Osborne, who's here. Yeah, if you want to come up to the seat, Mr. Osborne.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, if you can just speak into the microphone.
Yes, will do.
Thank you.
As a local carpenter, farmer living in Winford for the past 40 years, under the flight path 2.5 kilometres from the airport, I suffer from Bristol Airport's terrible disruptive noise. As soon as one jet has roared off to a distant rumble, the next jet screams its payload of bon viveurs off to the sun. The legal enforceable limits on noise levels, though frequently exceeded, take no account of the shock effect. This subjects us to a constant, alert, sleep-deprived state, not something represented in noise legislation. Concerned over man's wasteful use of fossil fuels and our devastating effect on the climate, I've committed the last 35 years of my working life to living within the smallest carbon footprint and helping others to do the same through my zero carbon work with Biopower UK and my aquaponics food and energy production demonstration farm. But Bristol Airport's deafening money-making operations drown out any ability to speak outdoors to the many people who come to learn. Many of us Brits who make the effort have taken the no-fly pledge, live our lives at carbon emission levels close to that of the inhabitants of third world countries. We do this through lifestyle choices we make, innovation, and the early adoption of low-carbon technologies. The time for freedom of choice of the masses to live as higher carbon footprint lifestyle is over, period. To live any other way leads to mad, mutually assured destruction. The time for large sections of countries' populations to live at max and travel at hypersonic speeds and transfer diseases is over. the COVID pandemic has brought home how modern aviation has shrunk this overpopulated world. Meaning aviation is the main carrier, the vector of human and plant diseases, wiping out our native forests as the suffering of the last year has shown, bringing a loss of life not seen since the Black Plague of the Middle Ages. We already live under the rule of law that limits our excesses. It's time now to extend that law to very drastically limit aviation on the grounds of environmental impact, human and plant health, noise, congestion, and the rights of others who sensibly choose not to fly. Only 20% of the world's population do fly. We need a fee and dividend carbon tax to apply first on air travel to enable the monetary system and our collective psyche to steer away from the brink of climate crisis we now face. Government nudges and tweaks Britain's to carbon zero so it would be completely at odds with its message if it were to do nothing to limit aviation, let alone allow this application for Bristol Airport to expand still further. It's already too big. This is your opportunity to signal we have already reached peak aviation, not only to all the other UK airports, but to spread the message worldwide through the Glasgow COP26 meeting of world leaders this year. We take the chair in this meeting and are perfectly placed to show the UK is prepared to lead the fight against climate and ecological crisis with real, bold, enforceable and effective drastic cuts to CO2 emissions. This leads me to the health effects of Bristol Airport's operation for me and my family. For 40 years, we have suffered huge year-on-year increases in the numbers of deafening, roaring, stinking jets, flights ruining my health and the quality of life and that of my family. The induced stress from 24/7, 365 sleep deprivation has wrecked my mental health and weakened my immune system, leaving me suffering colds, coughs, and flu for far longer than would be normal. From being the calm, happy-go-lucky man who slept all through the night, I am now awoken on average twice a night by the jets. And every time this happens, I just can't get back off, for fear the next jet repeating the downward cycle of sleep deprivation. This has left me short-tempered, snappily, and permanently exhausted, as my wife will testament. Doctors advise me I get away, but how can I do that? While I'm building a demonstration farm to lead communities and growers to a new, lower carbon, more sustainable growing system. This is desperately needed to offset the massive CO2 emissions emitted by the likes of expanding airports, spectacularly thirsty kerosene-powered jets, routinely burning through 320 tons of kerosene per day. That's 8 tankers from Avonmouth trucked to Bristol Airport per day, with the corresponding industrial devastation to our environment. How can I get away and delay this vital work? Mr. Ware. We elect government to act for the greater good of electors, to helm the nation through the stormy waters of greed, self-interest, and short-term gain. Instead, aviation has been allowed, indeed encouraged, to untrammeled growth that has led to 300 million passenger flights from the UK per year. Their airport spokesmen say they would like to expand this to 500 million flights per year. Lord Debden is quoted as saying, "If anything like this happens, we can just forget any pretense of addressing the climate emergency we face." On top of this, we have 1 million people living under the flight paths, suffering similar problems to me across the country. This number is set to explode as BA alters their glide path to gain height over Bristol's drinking water supply lake in the area of outstanding natural beauty designated Chew Valley. This is total madness. Noise. The World Health Organization sets limits of 60 decibels for nighttime intrusions, and your inquiry must take account of this. I have commissioned an extensive professionally prepared report by Dr. Dickerson, a renowned expert in the field of nuisance noise assessment, that along with real-time graphics display conclusively shows how every jet passing over my farm 2 kilometers from the runway not only infringes the World Health Organization limit, but massively exceeds the limits to the point where volumes are 20 times louder than their experts say are sufficient to wake humans. However, you decided not to allow the submission of this very important piece of evidence. This is without a doubt a serious error and cannot be corrected by your simply visiting a few villages around the airport. I say this because you will not have the calibrated Type 1 digital sound recording equipment to quantify the decibel level and store it in a form that will be accepted to press a case against the offender or convince government of the crimes that go unchallenged. So to recap, we are here to hold a foreign company's feet to the fire as it presumes to increase the harm that it is doing that we locals witness every day. The damage it is inflicting on us, our children, our ecology, and on the global climate must end. I would love to list for you the pros and cons for this application for airport expansion, but how can I when the balance is so heavily skewed against it? Bristol Airport's marketing policy has broadened its customer base from trips abroad for the wealthy newlyweds and nearly deads to the pound-stretched masses. Selling guaranteed sun at bargain basement prices has proved irresistible to people who do care about the damage their flight is having, but just can't resist a bargain. The only benefits of Bristol Airport's 85% foreign holiday flights business is for a few low-paid shop service and trolley pushers jobs and the phony perceived benefit of a cheap getaway deal. BA's magic is to externalize the costs of running a massive fossil fuel-dependent business and then claim it's green. Oil is extracted, refined, and tankered around the world, producing huge CO2 and smoky particulate emissions, leaving Bristol Airport's operation with a near invisible carbon footprint. But don't be fooled. It's not cheap, it's not green, it's a dirty steal. For every pound the people spend on this immoral air business, scores more will have to be spent by the NHS to care for the returning holidaymakers who contract COVID or a whole host of other diseases. And what about the burden on the NHS caring for the mental stress, respiratory and cardiac problems suffered by the continual blasts of up to 80 decibels and breathing kerosene fumes for 40 years? That's before we add the £1 billion exported from the UK that 10 million BA travellers spend. Then there's the trillions to reverse the climate emergency that we are simply not taking seriously enough. BA takes the profits, leaving everyone else to clear up the mess. In this little town, Weston-super-Mare, as the webcam streams this deliberation across the globe, let's make and send out the decision that marks peak aviation has arrived, and how the Western world is tackling the war on climate crisis with big jet trips cut and drastically higher flight fares. From here on, we will no longer accept greenwash from the fossil fuel big business with large government lobbying budgets. Instead, we will vote out the status quo and their big business cronies and choose to invest in true green carbon taxing government and to shop low carbon, high tech and local. We have to. Our survival depends on it. Panel, I strongly urge you, reject this application. As we stand on the brink of climate meltdown, I leave you with this fact. Business needs ecology, but ecology does not need business.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Just a couple of points. I've got your statement that was submitted the 23rd of July. Obviously, the statement you've just read out has slightly changed. So can you make sure that the programme officer's got a copy of the updated one for me? So we've got the correct version and the accurate version.
Yes.
Just in response to a comment you made about the noise study, we did accept the actual report as evidence, and I've got a copy of that here.
Yeah.
Okay. It was the recording that we couldn't accept. Okay.
Yes.
But you know, just to assure you though that this study, you know, we have read it, we've understood it, and we will be taking that into account. Okay. And we have done the site visit. We did spend a fair bit of time at Windford. The planes were taking off in that direction on that day, and we were able to hear probably about 6 or 7 planes. So we have got an idea of what, you know, the noise levels are like there as well. Okay.
But crucially, do you record those, and how do you hold airports to account for the fact they are breaking World Health Organization limits?
We haven't taken our own recordings. We don't have the instruments.
I didn't think you would have, no.
Nor would we produce our own evidence for this inquiry. That's not the role of us, okay? The noise issues we will be looking at and dealing with, and dealing with the points raised by all parties in our decision letter.
Okay.
Just one additional point, if I may. You may have heard that we're going to be doing some early morning site visits as well, with a noise emphasis, and Windford will be one of those locations that we're going to visit 6 till 7 in the morning, a little later in the inquiry.
Yes, crucially, 6 till past. The other morning I recorded 14 aircraft in 28 minutes. That's an aircraft taking off every other minute. And that's a truly shocking blast to be projected. And I go to bed late at night, and I therefore wake up late in the morning, or would like to, but I just can't sleep past that. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osborne.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We're a little bit ahead of time, but I think Mr. Goodwin is with us on Teams, if you're there, sir.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can, sir. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Phil Goodwin. I'm Emeritus Professor of Transport Policy at the University of the West of England in Bristol and at University College London. My personal family background is also half London and half West of England. I'll only take 10 minutes and I'll provide the transcript with more details of my credentials relative to this evidence and with citation details of references to documents, though for simplicity and to save time, I'll rely now, as far as possible, on common knowledge rather than extensive citation. My focus is on business risk affecting demand and therefore the case for need. I want to refer to the range of risk in the demand forecasts made by York Aviation Consultants for Bristol Airport Limited in November 2020. Its inquiry reference is CD 2.21, though I hope you won't need to have it in front of you. I don't think I'm repeating the same conclusions as discussed earlier or challenging the inquiry framework of government policy and planning. So, the methodology used by York Aviation to assess risk is to assign probabilities to various uncertainties about factors influencing future demand growth and use these to create a range of different scenarios about the future, high and low. And I'll quote from the York Aviation report, it's paragraph 3.3, the input assumptions for the short-term forecasts may be optimistic in general, as they do not sufficiently reflect the shock associated with COVID-19. However, in the medium to long term, when normal market conditions will return, we believe these forecasts represent a reasonable range. And I want to mention 4 risk factors which have not been taken into account, but definitely take us outside the phrase when normal market conditions will return. They relate to the longer term effects on demand of climate change itself, of Brexit, and of COVID-19. The first risk factor relates to the connection between carbon prices and carbon values discussed earlier in the inquiry. It was actually on the 7th of September. One of the uncertainties is the future level of the price of carbon. York Aviation say that their forecasts use the then relevant base carbon values, but they explain that in their forecasts they, I'll quote, assume that passengers will, via some mechanism, have to pay for the carbon emissions associated with their travel. In other words, the cost of carbon is internalised within the forecasts. So BASE provided a range of carbon values for appraisal, but the consultants actually used them as a range of prices in calculating the risk in the demand forecasts. I think that was the right approach when the carbon values were low. And if it was right then, it would also be right now they are higher, independently of whether government has yet taken a view about how, or indeed whether, that will be implemented. So the first risk factor is that prices might go very much higher than the ones they assumed less than a year ago. And this is well outside the range of scenarios used in the forecasts. To get an idea of the scale involved, the highest new base figure is 10 times bigger than the highest York Aviation figure. Not 10% higher, 10 times higher. Now, the second risk factor is not about the effect of aviation on the climate, which has been much discussed here, but the reverse effect, the effect of climate on aviation. And that's very material in calculating business risk. One of the most widely cited important underlying reasons for the growth in air travel in recent years has been the development of mass tourism for holidays in sunny seaside destinations. We can all relate to that. It's not a huge proportion of the airline demand, but it is a high profile and important one. Climate change, alas, even if we are successful in slowing it down, is already starting to undermine the attractiveness of precisely these destinations due to the greater incidence of storm surges, when sunny becomes either flooded or unbearably hot, or both, and in prospect sea level rise, which by definition will impact mainly on coastal and tidal areas around the world. This is a long-term trend, but we have already found that the long-term is very much sooner than we had thought. There's not any consideration of this risk in the forecasts. Now, optimists may hope that the world can adapt and maybe new, different sunny beaches, hotels and infrastructure will evolve in different places. But nobody can be sure of that. The risk is that climate change itself will materially undermine the realism of the forecasts. The third risk factor relates to the longer-term effects on aviation demand of Brexit and its associated policies. Now, I'm not talking here about the effect of Brexit on the economy, which may or may not be a short-term effect. It is about the explicit policy objective of reducing large-scale immigration. Now, one of the consequences of that will be fewer UK residents with families in 2 or more countries, who are a disproportionately important sector of the market as they tend to make far more international trips, sometimes several times a year, sometimes in family groups, and this would be expected to have a long-lasting impact. And the fourth risk factor is the indirect consequences of lockdown. People have learned how much useful work and social interaction can be done by Zoom and Teams and similar platforms. Now, these will never replace all face-to-face meetings, of course, just as working from home will not replace all journeys to the office. But it is not realistic to think that they will all disappear. A proportion of the reasons for flights, especially frequent brief business meetings, will be replaced. We do not yet know how big that proportion will be, but it will not be zero. It may be uncomfortable, but the aviation industry just has to accept that this is now part of normal. The point of all this is that these 4 main risk factors in the demand forecasts are not randomly some high, some low, and they balance out. They are all such as to depress future demand growth, not to increase it. Now, maybe in 5 years' time, we will have more confidence in how this works out. But now is the worst possible time to assume indefinitely prolonged growth. In the York Aviation forecasts, all the scenarios considered have uninterrupted, more or less straight line growth, still going up for the entire forecasting period. By 2040, this shows underlying growth of up to 89% on what's described as optimistic assumptions, and no scenarios at all showing stable figures, let alone a decline. Now, my judgment is that there is a very serious possibility that 10 million will not happen in the timeframe suggested, and possibly ever. The focus of the inquiry is to allow expansion from 10 million passengers a year, assumed to be imminent, to 12 million passengers per year, which I suppose would raise the question of then providing for 14 million or 16 million or 20 million. I don't think that this is a realistic view of the world we live in anymore, or the demand trends of the last 50 years. So thank you for your attention, and that completes my statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodwin. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we're a little bit ahead of time, and the next few haven't appeared on Teams yet. So we've got Councillor O'Rourke with us in the room. If you'd like to step up, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Let me introduce myself. I'm the leader of the Greens in Bristol. We are now the largest Green group in the country and equal with Labour on the Bristol City Council. We rose from 11 councillors to 24 in the elections this May, and I believe that that increase is because of the support that we have for the growing awareness of the climate emergency and the need to take action to limit carbon emissions and to halt global warming. The inspector's job here today, over these weeks, is to hear the appeal against the decision of the North Somerset councillors, the elected representatives there, to refuse to grant the expansion application for the airport. So, I mean, as a local politician, what I would like to talk about today is about democracy. Especially, I would like to focus on the fact that we live in a representative democracy and what that means in the context, particularly, of what has taken us so that we're here today. And I want you to consider what weight I believe you should give to the democratic forces that have spoken so loudly about the airport's plans to expand. So let's just remind ourselves of what a representative democracy is and how it works. We have elections at all levels, town, council, city, regional and national. And that's where we choose. We elect individuals who represent the people. And once elected, their representatives, their job is to listen to the people and to take what decisions they believe represent what the citizens want. That's their duty in a representative democracy. Listen to what the people tell you and take their decisions on their behalf. So, I'd like to remind the inspectors, if you will, about how representative democracy worked in and around this whole application and appeal. So, as I said, hearing the appeal today, what you're doing over these weeks, is you're hearing the decision of the 27 members of the North Somerset Council, the elected representatives there who rejected the application for the airport to expand. And in making that decision, those elected representatives took note of comments made by the public. And I have these comments here. You'll see there are 8 volumes. And this first volume, the comments made by the public who support airport expansion, have been collated and bound in this volume, this single volume. In the remaining 7 volumes, the comments made by people who object to the expansion of the airport have been bound in these volumes. There are over 11,500 comments, and 84% of them are objections. And while I would say that quantity is a quality all of its own, and it's beautifully exemplified here, and if I could feel that we could have a moment of levity, I would say that they speak volumes. But I would urge the inspectors, if they have the inclination to actually read some of them, because there's another story that's told there. Because in this, you'll find scant comment or no comment. And that indicates to me not a huge amount of thought. Whereas in these volumes, you will have well thought out, well argued objections based on planning grounds. So these are important documents for you to take account of. And obviously, the elected representatives in North Somerset listened and did what their representatives asked them to do, and they rejected the application. However, North Somerset isn't the only democratic body that have had comments and objections on this application. At all other levels. Let me take you through it. At the town council level, Weston-super-Mare joined many other town councils in passing motions where they objected to the expansion. At the council level, Bath and North East Somerset, Baines as we know it, formally objected to the expansion and submitted an official letter to the, as an objection in May 2019. Bristol City Council passed a motion against the planned expansion, and that was in December 2020. And in that, they said, the expansion is incompatible with the region's carbon reduction plans. And that motion was carried by cross-party support from the Lib Dems, Labour and the Green Group. And then let me take you to the regional level. The recently elected Weka Mayor, Dan Morris, has voiced clear opposition to the expansion of the plans. And in a recent article in the South Bristol Voice, he said, "I'm sticking firm to my commitment to oppose Bristol's airport's proposed expansion." I mean, that commitment is to the people who voted for him. He has more recently spoken about the need for moral leadership and has proposed a motion to the Joint Committee, which consists of himself as Metro Mayor, the 4 leaders of the local councils. And this motion makes clear that this region-wide combined representative authority is now firmly opposed to these expansion plans. The Weka Mayor has said, and I quote, "When it comes to the airport's further expansion, our net zero objectives will have been seen to be a sham." Mayor Dan Norris represents 1.1 million people. So, take it up to the national government level. Dr. Liam Fox, the local MP, and he was, let's remind ourselves, he won the vote to represent the views of the constituency and make decisions on behalf of these people. And he has submitted a number of formal objections to the expansion plans on various different material grounds. In his recent letter to the inquiry, dated on the 31st of August, he says that the local road network is straining at the seams. And he says, "I believe this is the primary reason why the proposed expansion of airport passenger numbers should not go ahead." And I put that in because I don't want to just limit it to climate emergency. There are other material factors which I know you're giving weight to. So the representative bodies, the Lib Dem MP for Bath has said in a recent press release, "In light of the necessity of achieving net zero emissions, I oppose the proposed expansion at Bristol Airport." She says, "Business as usual is not an option." So, in addition to these specific objections to the airport's plans, I'd like to also draw your attention to the fact that all local councils, Bristol, Bain, South Gloss and North Somerset, they've all, and the combined authority in Weka, they have all declared a climate emergency, and the airport expansion is incompatible with those targets. So, I hope I've made it clear. The people have spoken, loudly and unambiguously. They've marched on the streets. They've written letters. They've lodged formal objections. I myself coordinated a die-in at the airport to highlight the consequences of increasing carbon emissions. My electorate know my views on the airport's plans to expand, and they know that I oppose it. And I was re-elected in May to represent them again. The people have spoken, and their representatives have heard, and they have responded with the objections. What is the point of having a representative democracy if you don't listen? Please, hear how all the layers of elected representatives at town, city, county, regional, national level, they've all objected to the planned expansion. Please, respect the authority of the North Somerset Council to refuse the application. Recognise the wider support for their decision and reject the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Just to clarify, obviously you've got the volumes there of the support and the objectives from the original application. We have got copies of all those as well, so we have seen them.
That's
okay.
good. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you can give a copy of your transcript to the programme officer, if you haven't already.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Is they not here? Do we have a Mr. Andrew Leighton Price with us on Teams? No. Okay. Well, Mr. Carl Dainter?
Good morning. Carl Dainter speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you, if you want to, we'll come to you, sir, now, if you can turn your camera on and microphone on.
Of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I have a script that I'm going to read, and then I will submit that to the organiser on completion.
Thank you.
So, good morning. My name is Carl Dainter. I'm the Global Head of Aviation at MACE. MACE are a global programme management consultancy that work with clients all over the world to deliver major aviation projects at international and regional airports. MACE is a local employer and an advisor to many airports around the world, so we are well versed in the benefits to the local infrastructure that airport expansion, when planned sustainably and economically incrementally, can bring. We are supportive of the Bristol Airport proposed master plan and wish to put on record our support for the project that formed the basis of the planning application last year for a number of reasons. Expansion of the airport would continue to generate new skills and employment opportunities for all ages, demographics and backgrounds. The expansion will create white and blue collar opportunities for local people, both in the initial construction and then also the operation of the new assets that are created as part of the master plan. This will create new opportunities for the primary and secondary supply chains, not only direct jobs for Bristol Airport and the organisations directly involved in the airport, but it also creates jobs further down deep into the supply chain. The increase in capacity will increase the effectiveness and attractiveness for Bristol Airport and the wider region to attract inward investment. Increasing capacity will attract new airlines, offering new routes to current and new European destinations and potentially further afield. This will increase the choice and connectivity for local people, reducing the need to travel to other airports outside of the region for medium and long-haul destinations. Expansion would increase the national connectivity and regional choice for local people. It enables more flights to North England, Scotland, Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and will increase national trade, local opportunity, enhance export options, and will attract other British nationals to Bristol as a destination. Expansion of the airport will create economic growth locally and regionally. In addition to the jobs created directly and indirectly, it will also drive export and import opportunities for trade, providing increased connectivity for prominent local and national businesses situated in and around the Bristol region, and it boosts tourism opportunities, driving investment into the region and income to local businesses. Planning consent aligned with environmental conditions that seek to maintain the current accelerative drive towards decarbonisation and maintaining of noise levels will mitigate the environmental concerns. Bristol Airport already has an ambitious target of becoming the UK's first net zero airport by 2030 and have a clear plan as to how they are going to achieve this. In addition, surface access conditions attached to the planning consent, including the implementation of bus and coaching solutions can be attached to ensure that surface access mitigations are incorporated. I hope this information and this submission is useful to the people considering the appeal, and would like to take any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Clark's got some questions for you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dainter. It's very noticeable that your company is one of the very few companies to speak in support of the airport's plans today. I don't know if you've seen the list. Does your company have a commercial relationship with Bristol Airport? In other words, are they clients of yours?
Bristol Airport are not a client of Mace. We count several regional airports in the UK as our clients, so draw our experience and my expertise that I've just incorporated into the speech draws from that. But we do not have any commercial relationship with Bristol Airport, and we do not have anything to gain from the proposed master plan should it go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps I can draw your attention to, on your website, it talks about your company's ambitions. Number one ambition is stated to become a leading global contributor to reducing carbon. It also says our planet has reached a tipping point and action is needed now. Do you think, are those values and aspirations that you personally agree with?
They are. I am familiar with both our purpose and our priorities. One of our priorities is, as you state, to pursue a sustainable world. And yes, those are very much personal priorities of my own. And actually, I believe that in order for Bristol to continue its drive towards a net zero carbon, hereby improving the carbon emissions, i.e. reducing the carbon emissions through operation, the approval of the master plan is a very important step in enabling them to achieve that ambition.
Just for your information, we've shown that actually the expansion would lead to an increase in emissions. But my question is, so do you think the values and aspirations that we've just talked about, do you think they're compatible with your company's support for Bristol Airport's expansion?
Yes, I do. The construction need not be a contributor to additional carbon. Indeed, innovative incorporation of initiatives such as sustainable aviation fuel, where fuel is provided to aircraft with zero carbon impact, can only help to decarbonise the airline and airport infrastructure. So actually, increased activity through the airport will generate a critical mass of decarbonisation of both the assets that are created and the airlines and aircraft that use them, that will ultimately reduce the carbon consumption of the assets generated and the operation of the airport.
Yes, thank you. We've had long discussions about that, and I refer the inspector to those discussions. Thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dainter. Okay. Do we have a John Slay with us on Teams? No.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Excellent. Can you turn your camera on, please, so I can't see you? Okay.
A little bit. Okay.
Welcome. Yes.
Thank you. Right, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is John Slay. I'm a resident of Backwall. I'm also a parish councillor, though my views I'm expressing today on my own and not of the parish council as such. When I was a student in the 1970s, I read a book called The Limits to Growth, which highlighted the earth was not an infinite resource to be plundered. It predicted even then that continued economic and population growth could only be sustained for a little more than about 50 years. 50 years is up. We've had accelerated growth over that time with no real instances of control on consumption or population. And we are clearly now at a stage where opportunity to say no to further growth of activities which make a non-long-term contribution to climate change must be grasped. There's plenty of evidence. We've seen climate change effects around the world this year. It will have to happen in the future, which hopefully will be not too late. So why not here and now? The expansion of the airport to 12 million represents a 33% over its highest ever passenger figures. This means a third more emissions from car journeys and aircraft, third more traffic on what's clearly been stated as inadequate road systems, and a third more disruption to local residents in terms of noise. I want to be able to say to my grandchildren that I helped save their environment and their planet for them to enjoy as I have. What I want to see is that decision makers also want to sit comfortably in the future, rather than have to admit that they've contributed towards further degradation of local, national and global environments. Whatever beliefs we all have, whether they're a huge multinational or an individual, we are stewards of this planet and therefore have a responsibility to secure its future. George Monbiot recently wrote the following: if Earth systems cross critical thresholds, everything we've done, everything will be reduced to a layer of rock, rather like the dinosaurs. It's not going to be a smooth and linear transition we need. It needs to be a crash course. It is crucial to set a precedent by saying no to the expansion of the airport, not only to support a decision made by a democratically elected body, but so that others can confidently follow by also saying no before we follow the fate of the dinosaurs to an environment of our own making. Right, that's a little bit from the heart. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Mr. Slate. Thank you. And if you can get a copy of that to the programme officer if you haven't already. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm proposing now a short comfort break and we'll come back at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Very short break there. We will have a longer lunch break today. It's just we've got various people at various points, so thank you. Okay, I know we've got a few in the room. We've got Mr. Tom Barrett with us virtually, so if we come to you, sir, first. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name's Tom Barrett. I'm an engineer working in the renewable energy sector. I'm speaking this morning against the expansion of the airport. We're in a climate emergency. This has been declared by North Somerset Council and Bristol City Council, amongst many others, and the effects of climate change are visible all around. And you have to watch the news to see the stories of the fires in California, the floods in Germany, etc., etc. And in that context, I think that anything that we do that is irreversible in this respect would be totally irresponsible. Today, the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide are around about 416 parts per million. To keep global heating below 1.5 degrees C, this needs to stay below at least 430 parts per million. And according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and their recent comprehensive assessment of climate science, even if the world manages to limit warming to 1.5 degrees C, some long-term impacts of warming that are already in train are likely to be inevitable and irreversible. We can, however, stay within 1.5 degrees warming, but only just, and only if we cut emissions in the next decade. So in this context, the expansion of air travel is fundamentally incompatible with UK's net zero targets. UK carbon budgets, the latest of which requires 78% emissions reduction by 2035, are in fact the bare minimum to achieve less than a 1.5 degree temperature rise. And clearly, aviation is not going to come up with net zero solutions anytime soon. That's obvious. And in that respect, my view is that the airport's net zero publicity is fundamentally fraudulent. The aim of expanding an airport is to increase flying. And the cost of damage is not factored into the cost of flying. Neither the airport nor passengers pay the true cost of the damage they cause. And the cost of that impact is not negligible. A recent academic study suggested that each passenger flying on a transatlantic flight is causing $3,000 worth of damage. And if this was factored in, the airport's true return on investment would not be so exciting. And remember, to them, the Canadian pension scheme who own the airport, this is just a financial investment. And the impact of climate change is a global phenomenon. We'll suffer in the UK, but others more so, in Africa, in Asia, in low-lying islands where adaptation is impossible. So my view is that it's morally indefensible to act in a way that would increase emissions today. The UK is one of the biggest cumulative contributors to the total level of atmospheric greenhouse gases. Others have greater need and more right to, in inverted commas, use up the remaining emissions budget. And what a terrible example it would set as we approach our hosting of COP26 in Glasgow in November. A setting where we're going to tell the world that we're leading in all things climate change and emissions reduction. So at this moment in history, I think it would be an unconscionable act to expand the airport. How do we tell our children that we enabled increased flying in the midst of an irreversible climate emergency? Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we have then Ros Pears, if you'd like to come up. Oh, sorry, can you turn your microphone on? Yeah.
Thank you. Fire, flood, drought, heat wave, storm. We're all seeing the news, reading the headlines, even experiencing firsthand the effect of the climate and ecological emergency. We all heard those frightening words from the UN Secretary General about the latest IPCC report. Code red for humanity. Code red, a warning or signal of imminent danger. Imminent danger. That's a clear and chilling, urgent message to us all. My name is Ros Pears. I live in Radstock, 16 miles southeast of Bristol Airport. I'm pretty nervous coming here today, but I'm also very, very grateful to have this opportunity to speak to you all. Mr. Ware, Mrs. Searson, Mr. Young, I envy you greatly. I envy you your roles here and this position of responsibility and power the three of you have at this pivotal point in the life of humans on this planet. I envy you this opportunity you have here to make a difference in this climate crisis we are all facing. Let's not dwell on the past 30 years or so, when as a human race, we could have embraced the science and decarbonised slowly but steadily. We could have avoided ending up in the dire situation we now find ourselves in. But here we are, code red for humanity. Make no mistake about it, we are all living through history. We are all in this situation together. We can all play our part in making a difference. This is far bigger than a local issue. We are in a global climate and ecological crisis, and every single decision that limits or reduces carbon emissions counts. Not that I in any way want to diminish the significance of the issues facing everyone living near this airport. Air pollution, noise, sleep deprivation, traffic congestion, illegal parking, taxi drivers defecating in front gardens. It must be a living hell. I know we're now many weeks into this appeal process, and you will no doubt have been bombarded with arguments for the economic necessity of this airport expanding. Probably also the smoke and mirrors of magical high-tech solutions that don't even exist yet, and some that may never exist. Mr. Ware, Mrs. Searson, Mr. Young, I understand that in your work you have to balance out all the issues presented here. However, this inquiry now is different from those in the past. We cannot unknow what we now all know. What issues now can outweigh the threat of imminent climate breakdown and the collapse of life as we know it? So what's different now is the enormous moral responsibility on us all to make the right choices for the future of the planet. It's a time now for looking beyond immediate personal gains and connecting fully with our inner moral compass and doing the right thing. Our species caused this crisis, and now we have the opportunity to make urgent changes to remedy what we can. Yes, as individuals, there's much we can do in changing our lifestyles, including flying less, but the real impact in drastically reducing global carbon emissions lies with decisions made by governments, by corporations, by big polluting businesses, the aviation industry, and yes, planning inspectorates. Uncomfortable as this may be for some to hear, it's now morally wrong for any of us to continue with the carbon-intensive business as usual of the past 50 years. None of us are exempt from morality's burden, the aviation industry included. Those supporting this airport's expansion are surely missing this point. If your house is on fire, you don't start planning and building a larger extension. You take urgent, immediate action to put that fire out. If everyone's home is on fire, we all unite and work together to put the fire out. And we in the global north arguably have an even greater moral responsibility to do the right thing. There are many parts of the world where people are living far more sustainable lifestyles than most of us here, and who are already feeling the effects of climate breakdown in extreme ways. They haven't caused this crisis, we have. Looking around this room, it doesn't feel as if we are in imminent danger right now, does it? In spite of the terrifying images on the news, the experiences some of us may have had personally of heat waves or floods, for example, at times everything seems, well, just normal and safe and comfortable even. I know that's making assumptions about everybody here today, but speaking for myself, I have a roof over my head, food in the fridge, electricity to power that fridge, freely flowing drinking water on tap, money in the bank, and I'm pretty confident my house and garden will still be there when I go home later today, next week, next month even. If we try now, could we really connect now, here, in this room, with what it actually feels like being on the front line of climate breakdown? So many examples I could give. Let's just think of the Solomon Islands. You and your family live in the Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands that produce 1/100th of 1% of global greenhouse gases, just by the way. So, neighbouring houses have already been engulfed by the sea. You've already moved and rebuilt your family's home further from the shoreline, raised it up on stilts even, a huge labour. Slowly but surely, sea levels are rising, and storm surges and extreme weather events are increasing. Salty water is seeping into the land where you grow your food. Drinking water supplies are salinated. Can I really imagine what the fear and powerlessness must feel like? Can I put myself in those people's shoes and connect with how terrifying it must be, not knowing if my family home is safe, not knowing what to do to keep my children safe, whether I will find clean water to drink, will my crops fail, what will the next storm surge bring? Where should we go? Where will my family be safe? It's hard to really imagine what that must feel like, isn't it? And it's pretty upsetting too. We are all in this climate crisis together. We have one precious planet that we have caused unimaginable damage to. We all have a moral duty to do the right thing. Mr. Ware, Mrs. Searson, Mr. Young, what an opportunity you have here to be on the right side of history. The North Somerset councillors made a courageous and just decision last year when they rejected the planning application for the expansion of Bristol Airport. Now the onus is on you. Fire, flood, drought, heat wave, storm. Code red for humanity. I wish you all the courage and wisdom in the world to make the right decision here. Bristol Airport is big enough, it should not be allowed to expand. Thank you so much for listening to me today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pears. Okay, thank you. Marcus Grant, please.
Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this inquiry. I want to provide the inquiry with a small personal account. I know the inquiry is hearing from a large number of local people, from politicians, and also from expert witnesses. I was moved to want to appear after hearing some of the early accounts of business and potential business trends in the region with respect to air travel. I'm based in Bristol. I provide an account of someone involved as a sole trader in a consultancy, research consultancy, providing support to the World Health Organization Healthy Cities Programme and United Nations Human Settlement Programme, UN Habitat, with reference to the UN Sustainable Goals, and in particular, human and planetary health. I was an associate professor for healthy urban environments and deputy director of a World Health Organization collaborating centre until 2016, and now continue similar research and consultancy independently. And I'm editor-in-chief of a peer-reviewed academic journal called Cities and Health. I'll speak first to my own business trends of international travel, then reinforce messages that I hope you've already heard about the threat to planetary health and population health posed by the impact of aviation-related carbon emissions, and conclude with brief observations from my attendance at COP15 Copenhagen and speaking at COP21 event in Paris. So firstly, as a research consultant, I have the opportunity and am asked to attend many international project meetings and conferences, and also to provide education and training overseas. Over the past 7 years or more, I can track a steep decline in the degree to which I undertake these commitments using flights. I have been year on year cutting down on air travel due to the known impact on climate breakdown. Initially, there used to be two prongs to this. First, restricting long-haul flights to 1 a year from a previous 2 or even 3, which might be common in my sector. Secondly, across continental Europe, I started travelling one way by air and returning, say, by train. As such, for business, I've travelled to or come back from train to Bristol, from Coimbra in Portugal, from Barcelona, Freiburg in Germany, Rotterdam, Copenhagen, Berlin, and even Vienna. The latter, Vienna, in a single day, city centre Vienna to my home in Bristol. More recently, with the experience of the pandemic and the rise in virtual and hybrid conferences, I now intend to further reduce my air travel, probably to 1 long-haul flight every other year, if that. And I intend all continental travel, business and leisure, to be undertaken by surface modes. Moving on to threats to planetary and population health, my work involves engaging with the World Health Organization as an expert advisor. So I accept that I'm sensitized by their conclusions for health and climate breakdown. As we know, the IPCC states extreme heat thresholds relevant to health are projected to be exceeded more frequently at higher global warming levels, and that's with high confidence from their recent report. And I've referenced that. I've got a series of references here that I'll provide you with. With regards to WHO itself, there are many technical reports that I hope experts will have already presented to the inquiry. But I just choose this statement from WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. The pandemic is a reminder of the intimate and delicate relationship between people and planet. Any efforts to make our world safer are doomed to fail unless they address the critical interface between people and pathogens and the existential threat of climate change that is making our Earth less habitable. And that was his address to the 73rd World Health Assembly last year. With health, of course, we're not just talking about direct health impacts from extreme weather, but worrying and unpredictable changes in patterns of disease vectors, freshwater distribution and access, crop patterns, crop disease patterns, and ultimately mass population migration as parts of the Earth become unable to support human health. And with regard to UN Habitat, I'm simply reminding the inquiry of these statements that they've made. People are experiencing climate change in diverse ways. It affects our health, ability to grow food, housing, safety, and work. And that however small, every increase in global warming matters. I think that's a very important statement there, and that's referenced. And it's not only me. This knowledge that individual commitment and action can make a difference is spreading, is rapidly spreading, both in my professional circles, I see with colleagues, and ever wider circles all the time. Once I was in a minority as a business traveller, making my way across continental Europe by train. Now I regularly see social media accounts of similar journeys. And this sensitivity to the damage of air travel that air travel causes is now replicated in the mainstream media. For example, questioning of a government minister flying whilst on climate-focused negotiations, referenced, and covering of a recent report saying that we had previously underestimated the social cost of carbon dioxide emissions, expressed as the real cost of flying in the mainstream media, as referred to by the previous speaker. Finally, to say that having attended COP15 Copenhagen and spoken at COP21 in Paris, it's evident to me that people in the UK and our societal decision-making systems, such as the planning system, are lagging in their ability to respond to this threat, which is already affecting millions worldwide. Maybe COP 26 will help us all wake up and catch up. We need to step outside business as usual. An analogy is the glimpses we had back in winter 2019 of what was happening in Wuhan, seemingly far, far away. The lesson being that we need to take stock now and act before we're forced to act. Too late in the day and in a draconian and crisis-riven manner. As the WHO and UN Habitat say in a recent joint report referenced, if the purpose of planning is not for human and planetary health, then what is it for? Human health can be a material consideration at many levels of planning in England and Wales. The airline industry may say that regular flights to holiday destinations are good for individuals' health, but climate breakdown is already diminishing health, security and well-being of many communities at population level, and this is only set to affect more people and with more intensity, unless those of us with capacity to act now and act beyond business as usual. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant. Thank you. Okay, next we have Oscar Christopherson and Neve Roche. They're with us virtually. Can you hear us?
Yeah, we can.
Out your statement, please.
What explain
Thank you very much to both of you. Appreciate you taking time out of your school day to appear here today, so thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think physically in the room with us we have Annie Beardsley.
Good morning.
Can
Good
you just
afternoon.
speak into the...
Good morning.
If you can speak into the microphone just so we can hear you at this end, please. Thank you.
First, to introduce myself, I'm an American and a permanent resident in the UK since the early 1970s. I have siblings and extended family in the USA. My professional background is as a community artist, community mediator, mainly of neighbour disputes, and creative producer. Through my work in community arts, I travelled widely in Europe, North America, Japan, and New Zealand. I live in Bath, directly under the flight path to the airport. As an artist and arts professional, I make no claims to understand all of the technical, financial, or scientific information in this inquiry, though I've read widely on the subject. There was a strong theme of community development in my professional life. How is this relevant to the inquiry? I think that as an artist, I'm able to add layers of meaning and interpretation to everyday experience in order to reflect different perspectives and increase the accessibility of ideas and experiences. My work, particularly as a mediator in many different community contexts, has taught me the value of listening to many voices and perspectives and recognizing people's different needs. My work in the theatre meant that I was able to have a wide experience of different countries and different cultures, and an understanding that what may be taken for granted in one culture might be causing harm in another culture. As a member of a local community, I take certain things for granted. In other words, services like education, welfare, the NHS, etc., and local democratic process. It is important in a participatory democracy that people feel their votes count and that politicians can be trusted to implement policies that are in the interests of their local communities. We need to be able to trust that they will take decisions in our best interests that will do no harm to future generations. North Somerset Council evaluated all the evidence against increasing flights and passenger numbers and listened to their constituents and turned down expansion plans. This is what a functioning democracy looks like. However, Bristol Airport Limited and Ontario Teachers' Pensions Plan Fund seem to want to override local democratic process and impose an expansion of passenger numbers, flights, and carbon emissions on our community, because they can. They have the money to demand this inquiry and to fund expensive public relations and greenwashing campaigns. We are in a climate crisis. Climate change is real. It's caused by human activity. It's here, and it's going to get a lot worse. This is no longer opinion, it is fact. And every individual, corporation, or global industry must consider the long-term consequences of every decision they make. There is an urgent issue about the legacy we are leaving future generations. I have two beautiful granddaughters, and I'm assuming that you have children and hope to have grandchildren. But it's not just our children and grandchildren, but also the world's most vulnerable communities who are disproportionately affected by droughts, flooding, rising sea levels, and violent storms. The longer we take to reach net zero, the higher the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere and the worse the impacts of climate change. I am obviously concerned about emissions because I live under the flight path. We learned earlier this year that pollution from combustion of fossil fuels is not only fueling the climate crisis, but was responsible for 8.7 million deaths globally in 2018, more than HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. I believe it is the role of this inquiry and all of us to encourage corporate and institutional responsibility by contesting decisions that demonstrate harm to future generations. Businesses and other institutions should be encouraged to limit their use of aviation and to publish environmental impacts before choosing to embark on projects that will increase CO2 emissions and other environmental impacts. I am not against flying or regional airports. Flying is deeply embedded in contemporary life, but I believe this needs to change in the coming decades. Bristol Airport is big enough until such time as the technology for sustainably powered flights is available at scale and with zero emissions. All the research I have read indicates that this is a long way off and certainly not attainable within this part of the century. The fact is, frequent flyers need to fly less because UK government statistics for England show that in 2017, just 1% of people took 20% of all flights abroad, and 10% of people took 52% of all flights abroad. Though I'm not a frequent flyer, I will fly less, and I've already made that commitment. The IPCC report tells us that emissions have to fall dramatically next year and the year after, and keep falling dramatically if we are to limit global warming to 2 degrees centigrade. Quoting the report, the central conclusion from the overall linear increase in temperatures relative to emissions is that nothing short of a complete cessation of CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions will significantly stabilize the climate. And there's also a time delay of at least several decades after emissions cease before the climate can begin to stabilize. The report points out that between 64 and 86% of carbon emissions are directly related to fossil fuel combustion, with estimates approaching 100% lying well within the statistical margin of error. Thus, there is no way to begin to reverse climate disruption without an end to burning fossil fuels. I am an artist, not a scientist, economist, or lawmaker, but it seems pretty obvious to me that this expansion proposal will mean that emissions will rise significantly, with implications for public health, as well as a secure and stable future for our children and grandchildren. There is no way to fly long distances without causing massive carbon emissions, not now, and not in any realistic vision of the next 50 years. Whether we can act soon enough is now the critical issue. I would ask this inquiry to demonstrate their willingness to address the transformations that are now required by all of us in order to protect life on this planet. Please reject the expansion proposal. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Next, do we have Viv Talbot? Yeah. Thank you. If you'd like to take a seat.
My name is Viv Talbot. I work for a small charity working with disadvantaged communities in Southwest Bath. To be honest, I'm very nervous about public speaking. I've never before spoken at an event such as this. But I feel so passionately about the issue of airport expansion in the face of the climate crisis that I feel driven to go well beyond my comfort zone in order to express my concerns. My parents were both refugees from Nazi Germany. My mother only managed to get here in the nick of time, just a few weeks before the outbreak of war. Not everyone in my family was so lucky. Perhaps that's why I've grown up realizing that survival is something we can't take for granted. My parents were lucky to find a safe refuge, but refugees from climate breakdown are unlikely to be so fortunate. And we may just find out that in the face of climate catastrophe, there's no longer a safe space to escape to. I'm not an expert, and I can't tell you any new scientific facts, but I do listen to the experts. I believe they're the ones who are best qualified to guide us. The recent IPCC report couldn't have been clearer. Emissions of greenhouse gases from human activities have already led to 1.1 degree increase in global temperatures, and unless there are immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 or even 2 degrees centigrade will be beyond reach. The report also projects that if atmospheric emissions continue at current rates, we're heading towards a rise in global temperatures of around 3 degrees. The effects of just 1.1 degree of global warming are already being seen. Record-breaking heat waves in Moscow and the Pacific Northwest, catastrophic wildfires in Greece, Oregon, Canada, devastating floods in Germany, Australia, New York, China, cyclones, hurricanes. Climate breakdown is happening faster than most of us could have dreamt. It's clear that unless we make huge and very rapid reductions in our carbon emissions, we'll be faced with catastrophic and unimaginable consequences. Business as usual is simply not an option. Relying on as yet unproven future technology to bail us out is taking a huge gamble with all of our futures. The stakes couldn't be higher. In the face of the scale of the emergency we're facing, putting a halt to airport expansion seems like a very small sacrifice to make. To sum up, my message is very simple. The climate emergency is real and is happening right now. If we don't do everything possible to curtail our carbon emissions, we simply won't survive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Talbot. Okay. Just a reminder as well, if you haven't submitted a copy of your transcript, can you do so to the programme officer? I'll keep saying that at various points out of the day, but we just don't want to miss anyone. Okay. Do we have a Susan Sidey? Here. Ah, excellent. I know we're a bit ahead, but welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Susan Sidey. I'm a retired civil servant and I live in Bath. I would like to share my reflections on the first two sentences of paragraph 7 of the National Planning Policy Framework as amended in July 21 and how they relate to the proposed expansion of Bristol Airport. The framework says, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with these words, the purpose of the planning system is to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. At a very high level, the objective of sustainable development can be summarised as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So what needs are being met by this expansion and whose needs are they? And what are the needs of the future generations that should not be compromised? According to the various documents, the main purpose of the expansion is to ensure the airport can continue to meet demand for air travel to and from the southwest, an extra 2 million passengers per annum. Who is demanding this air travel? Is air travel a need? Well, the pandemic, terrible though it is, has given us a hard lesson in what things are important. It confirms what we already really know, that people can actually survive without air travel. And recent research shows that in the UK, 70% of flights are made by a wealthy 15% of the population, with over 50% of the population not flying at all, further illustrating that most UK air travel is not a need. This echoes my own experience. None of the many flights I have taken in the past, work or leisure, was essential. A city break here, a beach holiday there, and an occasional quite interesting conference. They were nice to haves in a consequence-free world. Perhaps the majority of air travel might more accurately be described as just one way through which some wants can be met. The expansion is, therefore, seeking to satisfy yet more non-essential wants, wants that could be met by means other than by flying. What are the needs of future generations which should not be compromised by the expansion? Are their needs really just wants as well? Are we comparing like with like? Unfortunately not. Evidence shows that the most basic necessities of life, food, clean air and water, shelter, safety, all will be severely compromised by climate change, fueled by the continued emission of greenhouse gases, something that flying provides by the ton. Flying is not so consequence-free after all. The airport expansion allows for an increase in carbon emissions at a time when we know from the government's own Committee on Climate Change that the UK is failing badly in its task of curbing them. And let's not kid ourselves that climate change is a problem of the distant future. Even since this inquiry started its work, we have seen devastation across the world from droughts, wildfires, hurricanes and flash floods, the scale of which has shocked even climate scientists. An IPCC report described by the UN Secretary-General as representing a code red for humanity, and a UNICEF study that shows 1 billion children are already at risk from the impacts of climate change. So it seems to me that at its heart, this expansion of Bristol Airport aspires to meet the additional wants of a current local few at the expense of the essential needs of the future global many, something which is surely the very opposite of sustainable. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, do we have a Alistair Sorday on Teams?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, welcome, sir. If you want to turn your camera on, thank you.
Thank you. I'm talking from France, so forgive me for any interruption.
Okay, it's a little bit quiet on the line, so if you could just speak up as much as you can, sir. Thank you.
Okay. I'm the founder of Alistair Sorday Publishing. We've been a travel company in Bristol now for nearly 30 years, and we employ about 150 people. For nearly 10 years before that, I ran a walking and cycling travel company. So I've been a member of the Bristol business community nearly 40 years. I also briefly led the Bristol Green Capital bid, which Bristol won. I wonder if the applicants for this permission are aware of this bit of local history. Our company has always paid very close attention to our environmental impact. We promote local economies, cultural exchange, and the minimal use of aircraft. We've not always been successful, but never in nearly 40 years in the business community have I heard a single voice raised to suggest that expanding Bristol Airport would be in any way beneficial. Not one single voice, except for that one man, the MD of Bristol Airport. He gave a presentation at a Business West, during which he impressively revealed his ambition for more flights, more cars, more facilities, and more growth. I asked a question about carbon emissions, and it was received very coldly by the chair, who closed me down and refused to follow through. there was a palpable hostility to me in the room. Since then, there has been considerable change, and business has moved on. I will illustrate this with another story. About 15 years ago, I attended a presentation by a developer and the council on the advantages which would flow to the business community from a massive greenfield development to the north of Bristol. I asked what provision had been made for cycling and was met with a blank stare. I turned to the audience of about 300 business people and asked how many regularly use their bicycles for work. Not one hand was raised. But things have moved on, in some cases dramatically. There has been a rapid growth in business networks exploring change. The Employee Ownership Association has grown from 300 businesses 2 or 3 years ago to nearly 1,000 now. B Corp, with its gutsy American title, has grown to nearly 4,000 businesses in 70 countries. They are all bent on changing the way business thinks. Even the travel business is changing. Cardiff University has just published a report revealing that 47% of travellers plan to fly much less in the future. It is hard to find a representative voice for the whole business community. I'm sorry that credibility is given to views expressed by businesses which have something to gain from airport expansion. The thousands of others which will gain from a better environment have no communal voice. My hunch, based on those 40 years of contact with the business community, is that most Bristol businesses have not given it much thought, but that if asked, they would wonder at the wisdom of planning to fly more people out of the region and creating greater emissions in the process. Last night, one of the longest established Bristol bicycle businesses said to me, and I quote, "We're struggling to see any bit of benefit to expanding the airport." The Western world is distinguished by its carelessness for the future. But only yesterday I was offered the following piece of Maori wisdom. It goes like this: He aha te mea muni o te so, which means apparently, what is the most important thing in the world? And the answer is he tangata, meaning the people, the people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Do we have Colin Davis with us? Not yet. We are a little bit early, so okay. Sophie Feeble.
Hi. Hello. Yes,
Hello.
I'm here on Teams.
Thank you. Okay, if you'd like to, if you're ready, because I appreciate you were down for a little bit later, but thank you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm ready.
Thank you.
So hello and thank you for having me here. My name's Sophie and I'm a citizen of Clevedon, around a 15-minute drive from the airport. I'm a 27-year-old zoologist working in fundraising for the nature conservation charity RSPB. I've been overwhelmed learning about the climate and ecological crisis that we now are in the middle of. We are witnessing the 6th mass extinction of species and the first one that's attributed to the cause of human behaviour, as discussed in the UN IPCC reports. Species are not adapting quick enough to our rapid changing of their environment. It gives me huge grief and sadness to see that money paves the way in this world and those with power don't seem to care what we lose as long as there's economic gain. But this is a dangerous paradox, as soon we will lose it all if we keep going down this dangerous trajectory. We are in code red for humanity, and my generation, those below, even those above, can't understand how we have the science, which is clear to say we're in an emergency. We have the technology and the knowledge to get us out of this emergency, and yet we're still not seeing meaningful enough action that's proportionate to this emergency. What we are seeing is further airport expansion, further road networks being built, new oil expansion and new coal mines. We're losing faith in the system and more people are suffering with eco-anxiety. As a young girl, I suffered with asthma, and we live in a world where we have illegal and toxic air pollution. It's as if this does not mean anything to anyone as we continue with these destructive practices rather than turning the tide to make a difference. Making this decision to expand the airport will lead to death, whether it be from asthma or from increased natural disasters like floods or droughts or fires across the world, as we have recently seen a surge of. By giving permission for this airport expansion to go ahead right now, you'll be complicit in mass murder in my eyes and in the eyes of many. The evidence now is too stark and too clear, and the counter-arguments for expanding seem all hypothetical. Please don't gamble with lives and the livelihood of the next generation and even the current generation. And as if we need any more reason not to go ahead with the airport expansion, this is the year of COP26 being hosted in the UK, and it is paramount for world progress on this that we set a strong example this year. If we expand Bristol Airport, then other countries will think they can do what they like too, and once again we will hit a gridlock of no action being taken. Please make the right decision. I'm terrified for my 2-year-old niece, Layla, and also to have kids of my own. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Colin Davis, please.
Hello.
Hello,
Can you hear
welcome.
me? Hi. My name is Colin Davis. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Bristol. I'd like to make 3 points today. I'll start by focusing on 2 of the consequences of increased aircraft noise. And in discussing this evidence, I'll draw on my own professional expertise as well as on my own experience. And then I'll finish by making an appeal to you as a concerned local resident and also as a global citizen. So the first point I'd like to consider is the impact of noise on cognitive processes, particularly in children. There's very good evidence that aircraft noise has a negative impact on cognitive processes. And this has been studied in particular with reference to the effects on children's learning, and especially on reading comprehension, which is a good proxy measure of how well children are learning. And reading comprehension is important for many reasons. Early on in their schooling, children are learning to read, but later on, they are reading to learn. And high levels of reading comprehension give children great advantage in expanding their vocabulary, their knowledge, and their understanding of the world. And we know that children with low levels of reading comprehension have fewer opportunities. It affects their ability to go on to further study, the jobs they're able to apply for, how much they'll learn, and even their likelihood of spending time in prison. Reading comprehension is important for the individual in that it enriches their lives, it allows them to travel to different worlds of the imagination, but it's also important for society because a workforce with high levels of literacy is more productive, and this is associated with greater economic benefits. In my own research, I've spent several years studying methods to improve children's reading comprehension, as well as other aspects of literacy. Since 2000, I've published over 50 peer-reviewed scientific articles on the topic of visual word recognition, essentially what happens in the first 100 milliseconds after the reader's eyes land on a printed word. And I've also led a major randomized controlled trial funded by the Nuffield Foundation, which took place across 13 primary schools in and around Bristol. And as part of this research, we assessed reading comprehension and other measures of literacy in well over 1,000 children, some of which were then randomly allocated to different reading intervention conditions and were followed up over the course of 2 school years. And that research was published this year in the journal Reading Research Quarterly. So I mention all of this in order to establish that I have relevant expertise in conducting and evaluating research on children's reading comprehension. One thing I can say on the basis of that research is that learning to read is a difficult skill with which many children struggle with, and it's not an easy thing to help those children. There are many different methods of reading instruction that have been proposed, but many of them have little or no evidence base. And while the consensus position is that phonics instruction is the teaching methods that's associated with the best outcomes, even here the evidence is somewhat mixed, and many children will continue to have difficulty with reading after intensive phonics instruction. However, although we've had difficulty in establishing reliable methods of improving children's reading comprehension, we do know that we can make their reading comprehension worse by exposing them to aircraft noise. And given what we know about reading, and in particular its dependence on attention and memory, both of which are sensitive to exposure to chronic noise, it's not surprising that exposure to aircraft noise results in deficits in reading performance. And that's not simply an assumption, but a well-established empirical finding. There has been a systematic review by the World Health Organization which described this evidence as medium quality, which for epidemiological evidence in the context of public health constitutes strong evidence. There are 14 published studies I'm aware of that have examined aircraft noise exposure effects on reading and oral comprehension. And of those 14 studies, 10 observed a statistically significant association between higher aircraft noise exposure and poorer reading comprehension. And 2 further studies found a trend in the same direction. A good example of those is the study by Stansfeld and colleagues that was published in The Lancet in 2005. And this was a cross-national epidemiological study that assessed 2,844 children across 89 schools in the Netherlands, Spain, and UK. And they used noise contour maps and on-site measurements to establish the extent of children's exposure to aircraft noise at school and standardized tests to measure reading comprehension. And they matched the schools within countries for socioeconomic status, so to control for any effects of this variable. And the results showed a linear association between exposure to chronic aircraft noise and impairment of reading comprehension. That is, the more noise children were exposed to, the worse their reading. The researchers' conclusion from that study was, I quote, "Schools exposed to high levels of aircraft noise are not healthy educational environments." Now, I noted that this evidence was not considered by Mr. Piper in his review of public health impacts. He did make the point, as have others, that any negative impacts must be weighed against positive impacts associated with airport expansion, which I concede. But as far as I can tell, there has been no consideration of the negative economic impacts of expansion that would result from the impact on children's learning in local communities. And I believe this inquiry should carefully consider those impacts when it's weighing the evidence. Children have a right to education, and to uphold that right, it's necessary that the environmental context should be conducive to learning. Now, a second impact of aircraft noise that I'd like to consider concerns its impact on mental health. There's various evidence to support an association between aircraft noise and increased levels of depression and anxiety. But I'd like to focus on an even more specific aspect of anxiety, which is becoming especially prevalent among young people. Not only young people, but especially amongst the young. There are many stressors that affect young people today, but we know from surveys that one of their greatest concerns is the impact of climate change on their future. And they have very good reason to be worried. This is not an irrational concern. When the IPCC tells us that we are at code red for humanity, they're doing that to try to ensure that everyone hears that message. And young people do hear it, and it alarms them. And one of the things that is most concerning for young people is the sense that our leaders are not taking this existential threat seriously. So let me read you a quote from a recent paper about young people's experience of climate anxiety. This young person said, "At its root, our climate anxiety comes from this deep-set feeling of betrayal because of government inaction." That quote comes from a study that has recently been reported by my colleagues from the University of Bath. They surveyed 10,000 young people across 10 countries. It's the largest study of its kind, and it highlights the degree to which young people are scared about their future. More than 45% of them said that their feelings about climate change negatively impact their daily life and functioning. And over half of the young people in the survey agreed with the statement that humanity is doomed. Now, at one level, I think this is really striking, and it's an appalling indictment of climate inaction and our government's indifference to young people's concerns. But at another level, I have to say that it's not at all surprising to me as someone who works with young people, because my students are terrified by climate change. They feel despair. They are grieving the loss of their future. They say quite openly that they don't believe it would be safe or responsible for them to have children of their own, to bring a baby into an uncertain future. And it was in large part as response to those concerns that my university, University of Bristol, declared a climate emergency 2.5 years ago. And our Vice-Chancellor talked about the role of climate change anxiety in young people's mental health problems. Following that declaration, I spoke to many students at other universities who wanted to know how they could encourage their university to follow suit. And that was something that they wanted to bring about because they felt that it was a powerful acknowledgement of the reality of this threat, and that having this sense of acknowledgement would have a positive impact on their mental well-being. And now there are several thousand universities that have declared a climate emergency. But as time goes on, those declarations, whether they're by universities or councils or parliaments, start to ring hollow when they are not accompanied by action. And when people see fossil fuel developments going ahead as if there were no climate emergency, this exacerbates their sense of unease that leaders are still not taking this threat seriously. And it is a very real threat. Now, with these kinds of anxieties, what one might ordinarily say to people is, try not to think about it. Try to avoid the things that are stressing you. Don't read the news. Avoid reading the news about new coal mines and new oil fields in the North Sea. But one thing that's very hard to avoid is the sound of planes going overhead. Every one of those planes, with its engines roaring, screams a message that we are proceeding with business as usual as it carries us over the abyss. I'm not aware of any published studies on the topic, but I can tell you that I have spoken to people who describe aircraft noise as something that exacerbates their climate anxiety. So for the residents of Somerset and Bristol, there will be people who will experience increased aircraft noise, not simply as an annoyance, but as a tangible manifestation of the way in which perceived and possibly illusory economic benefits are being used to justify further death and destruction. And that brings me on to my final point. So you will be aware, no doubt, that this week our regional Metro Mayor, Dan Norris, has announced that he's tabling a motion to oppose the expansion of Bristol Airport. And in explaining that, he said, we are in the midst of a climate and biodiversity emergency. The vast majority of people across North Somerset, Bristol, Bath, and North East Somerset and South Gloucestershire know this and are rightly extremely concerned. So, he said, I'm calling on the local leaders to show moral leadership and courage and do what is right. I tried searching some of the technical reports that have been submitted to this inquiry, but I was unable to find any that included the word morality. And some people will ask what morality has to do with it anyway. In that context, I want to draw your attention to a paper that was published this year in the journal Nature, one of the preeminent scientific journals. The title of the paper is The Mortality Cost of Carbon. And it is our best attempt to date to estimate the impact of carbon dioxide emissions on deaths due to heat waves. And the result of this analysis is the introduction of a new metric, the mortality cost of carbon. And it implies that adding 4,434 metric tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere will cause one excess death globally between 2020 and 2100. And again, this is only deaths related to excess temperature, so it doesn't consider deaths due to other extreme weather events, such as flooding, cyclones, drought, increased disease. So it's clearly a considerable underestimate of the true mortality costs of climate change. But nevertheless, it allows us to compute a lower bound on the number of people who we are killing when we fail to reduce our emissions, or as in this case, when we increase our emissions. So according to the figures I was able to find, the projected carbon emissions of Bristol Airport in 2026, if expansion proceeds, are 1,184 kilotons per year. And that, I note in passing, is possibly an optimistic assessment, as it depends on the planes in 5 years' time emitting less carbon dioxide than they do now. So we can use that projection to ask, how many people will die of heat death because of Bristol Airport? And the answer, according to the mortality cost of carbon metric, is that 267 people will die for each year that we emit those projected levels of 2026. So thousands of people every decade. And of course, that number will increase as emissions increase. And to be clear, we're not saying that those 267 people will die in the same year that the emissions are released, but nor should we imagine that heat-related deaths are all way off in the future when we're gone. This summer, we saw hundreds of deaths in the Pacific Northwest in Canada due to the very high temperatures they experienced there. We've seen excess deaths associated with heat waves in the UK regularly over the last few years. More than 70,000 people died in Europe in the heat wave of summer 2003, according to peer-reviewed analyses. And so when the Metro Mayor says that this is a moral question, he is absolutely correct. Many people will die if this expansion is allowed. And that might be an uncomfortable fact to dwell on. It's not a very polite English kind of way to argue a case. But I do hope that it will be in the forefront of your mind as you are making this decision. Planning decisions are serious. We all understand that. We realize they have important consequences on people's lives. But in the case of this decision, you have a button in front of you. And if you press that button, you are effectively consigning thousands of people globally to die very unpleasant deaths. Now, some people will say that moral questions shouldn't impinge on inquiries like this, but I think that is a matter for you to decide. Is this an amoral inquiry? Should we ignore moral considerations here and hope that they are considered elsewhere? But if so, where is the morality in this process? Who will show moral leadership? The councillors of North Somerset already have. But it turns out it's not enough. We need more decision makers to be courageous and show moral leadership. So I urge you to be bold in your interpretation of your remit and to take on that responsibility. And I, and many others, thank you for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can you send a copy of your transcript to the programme officer if you haven't already? Okay.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
If I could just add one matter, just for the inquiry's information. You referred there to the regional Metro Mayor tabling a motion to oppose the appeals scheme. As far as I know, that hasn't happened yet, but we are aware of it because I think his personal assistants have been in touch to find out how, if that does happen, how he can get some comments into the inquiry. I think that's probably where it stands at the moment. We haven't heard anything since. But I just thought I'd mention that so that other people in the inquiry knew that we knew that that was a possibility. Yes, Mr. Clark.
Just to clarify, so the vote is next Tuesday?
Ah, okay. Yeah, thanks. I mean, obviously, there's absolutely no problem with getting comments in after that vote, assuming that that it's carried. But thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
He's on a train.
Okay. That's,
There's a train that was given 12.
Okay, our next person is unfortunately delayed by the train, so we'll have a very short break. Hopefully they'll be with us soon. If we come back at 12:30, then we'll have a longer lunch break. They're the last one this morning, and then we'll have a longer lunch break after that. Okay, thank you. Okay, everyone, thank you. So we have Adrian Tate with us. Welcome. We've been efficient this morning, so we had a little break before you came, sir. So if you'd like to start.
Thank you. I'll start with a brief summary of my own background, so you'll have a sense of where I'm coming from. I've lived in Somerset since 1982, currently at Barton St David near Somerton. I'm a retired psychotherapist. My work for the NHS in Devon included teaching and supervision of trainee psychiatrists. I have a long involvement in environmental issues, having chaired a transition initiative on the Somerset levels for over 10 years. I'm now on the board of directors of Reimagining the Levels, which was instrumental in planting 20,000 trees on the Somerset levels in the winter of 2021, and I'm a director of Somerset Climate Action Network, Somerset CAN. I'm a co-founder of the Climate Psychology Alliance, an international network of concerned mental health professionals, which originated in the UK, where it is registered as a charity. I'm also a chapter author in the recently published book, Deep Adaptation, Navigating the Realities of Climate Chaos, edited J. Bendel and R. Reed, Polity. Others better qualified than me will have furnished the planning inspectors with scientific, legal, local environmental and technical evidence. I will limit my statement mainly to my current field. I will begin with a brief explanation of the focus and purpose of this field of work as background for my argument. Climate psychology draws widely from psychology and the psychological therapies. Given the human causes behind the current climate and ecological emergency, the first aim of this discipline is to understand and help to address collective failure to remedy the situation. Secondly, as the consequences and implications of that failure become ever clearer, climate psychology promotes support for those who have been traumatized by extreme weather impacts or profoundly troubled by the very evident acceleration in extreme weather events associated with climate disruption. Climate psychology is a psychosocial enterprise which reflects the inseparability of the culture in which we operate from our functioning as individuals. I'll proceed to my argument. The Bristol Airport expansion proposal and the appeal by the airport's owners against the Planning Committee's rejection of that proposal is a striking example of the clash between two opposing mindsets and forces in our culture, resulting in conflicting definitions of progress. That clash is occurring on a national and global level and is being fought out in many locations, such as this one. On the one hand, we have the momentum of 2 centuries of fossil-fueled economics, which have created wealth, mobility, and comfort for a portion of the world's population. But a feature of this economic system is the externalization of environmental and human costs for the benefit of those who use and/or profit from the products of the system. The bearers of those costs are somehow deemed not worthy of attention. In the case of highly energy-hungry activities such as aviation, escalating emissions from burning fossil fuels at a phenomenal rate constitute the single greatest factor in our rapidly deteriorating climate stability and air quality, as well as a significant factor in environmental degradation more generally. Climate stability and a thriving global ecosystem are the bedrock on which human civilization has developed over the past 12,000 years. For the last 200 of those years, fossil fuels have propelled economic development, and their consumption has risen almost vertically during the past 75 years. The opposing perspective on our meteoric development from that which sees it purely in terms of progress is that the Earth system lights are all flashing red. We, some of us, are flourishing at the expense of the life support systems on which everyone depends. So fossil fuel growth has become a perverse indicator of progress. This predicament was ably expressed by Al Gore in his 2006 film, An Inconvenient Truth, with the image of a pair of scales, all that gold on one side and the whole earth on the other. There are solutions, but they involve an economic and energy transition far more rapid than is currently being accomplished, one that is getting more challenging all the time, while irreversible damage is also mounting. Given this scenario and the vested interests in business as usual, it is not surprising that efforts have been continuing for decades to deny, avoid, or fudge the issue. But the stakes are almost unimaginably high. The hospitality, if not habitability, of our Earth. For this reason, commitment to a tolerable future must include speaking truth both to fossil-fueled power and fossil-fueled convenience. That is the meta-issue at the heart of this appeal hearing. To permit expansion of Bristol Airport at this time will therefore be a battle lost in the urgent struggle to stabilize our dangerously deteriorating planetary systems. Even the term business as usual is an unsatisfactory one. A decision which aligns with prolonged fossil-fueled activity would yield some short-term gains for relatively few people, but in the not-so-long term, it would contribute to a catastrophe for everyone, well beyond anything usual. The Paris goal of heating in the 1.5 to 2 degree range is itself dangerous, and I've included a reference in my electronic version of this statement. And current policies point to a catastrophic 2.9 degrees of global heating, and I've also included a reference to support that. The risk of positive feedbacks taking heating beyond even that level is a substantial one. There is no prosperity on a dead planet, no jobs, no convenience, no future. This is not a crazed dystopian vision. It is grounded in the findings of copious peer-reviewed science and accelerating extreme weather events. The Bristol Airport decision rests partly on unique local factors, all of which are important. I hope I have made clear that it is also part of a far wider issue. If the opponents of rapid decarbonisation of our economy should win, then we, and certainly our children or grandchildren, will all be the losers. I will end with one further reference to psychology. The world for which we are heading, without a radical and progressive cut in greenhouse gas emissions, is so unpleasant that it is hard to imagine. Because it is hard to imagine and so unpleasant, people have great difficulty believing that it is a distinct possibility for which we are still on course. It is natural to imagine that things will be fine, that we will muddle through, or like Dickens's Mr. Micawber, that something will turn up. But taking responsibility rather than wishful thinking is what the current situation calls for. A heavy burden of responsibility rests on those who are charged with making decisions between 19th and 20th century economics or a sustainable future. It is important that those charged with such responsibility, you, the inspectors, know that this burden is understood by the Climate Change Committee, that 80% of UK residents have concern about climate change. That's from Statistica, May 2021. As, in my direct experience, do environmentally minded people in our county, along with a very clear sense of what the correct decision will be in this case. I have received support for this submission from the Steering Committee of Climate Action Athelney, formerly Transition Athelney, the Board of Directors of Reimagining the Levels, also the Board of Somerset Climate Action Network.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Okay. All right, that brings this morning's session to a close. We'll reconvene at 2 p.m. That's the next lot of appointments, so we've got a slightly extended lunch break today. So thank you everyone for your efforts this morning, and see you at 2 o'clock.